Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, COVID and the HR Tipping Point, what small businesses need to know about HR during the pandemic. My name is Mike Vanoy. I'm the head of marketing at Assure, and really excited to bring this topic to you today because I think there's always been probably a big question mark for growing businesses. When is it that I need to add HR, right? And I think what's going to become obvious in our conversation today is there is no clear singular line in the sand. For sure, it's not what I think is a misnomer, the 50 employee mark, right? So there are certainly some laws that kick in when you hit 50 employees, like the Affordable Care Act. But we're going to talk about how the need for an HR, if not a full headcount or a full HR function, at least the need for HR best practices to be implemented into companies really from day one. And so we'll talk about that briefly in a pre-COVID world. But I think, like many things, COVID in the pandemic has really been an accelerator of these issues in why small businesses really have to be thinking, I'd say what used to be a progressive thinking in these matters is really to the forefront if we're going to survive. And then, when this thing's over, and maybe there's no such thing as over, it's just going to be the new normal, how we all thrive and then grow our businesses coming out of this. So a little backdrop before I introduce my guests. So I think we all kind of remember maps like this, on the news and on our web screens, especially like back in March, right? Well, if we go back even a little bit further, February 29th, King County in Washington is where the first patient was ever identified in the U.S. And so they were really ground zero. So obviously the map has changed a whole bunch. Different parts of the United States have been hit a lot harder than others. But King County was really the very, very beginning. And coincidentally, here's a picture of King County. So most of us that aren't from the Northwest, when we hear King County, we don't really realize that we're talking about Seattle, the greater Seattle metro market, right? And right next to Seattle, there's this town called Bellevue, right across the lake. And we have an office there. And so that office, coincidentally, is our HR services team. So these are people, and this is not a sales pitch. I'm just explaining, how we come to having some expertise here. This is a team filled with HR certified professionals that act as an outsourced HR function for our clients, right? They provide projects, consulting basis, and quite literally, in many cases, the entire outsourced strategic HR function as an HR exec. And so because of that, because we were ground zero for where COVID hit the US, that team has been receiving thousands of calls really before probably most anybody else in the country, right? And so not only is it a team of certified HR professionals with incredible domain experience and knowledge, I would say more COVID specific experience than any place you can ever find. So all that to say, not a sales pitch, but I want you to know who you're going to be talking to today, who you're listening to today, and the incredible experience and I'd say wisdom that this team brings. So without further ado, I want to do some introductions. So first, Shannon Chapman, she's an HR manager for Assure. Shannon has been with Assure since 2014. She's helped clients with hands-on tactical projects, but also partners with leadership of our clients' organizations to drive strategic initiatives. She's helped in a whole bunch of industries, anywhere from parking services to senior living, medical facilities, restaurants, nonprofit, retail, and more. Before joining Assure, she had 20 years of HR experience in progressively senior roles. She was the HR director for 2 Dallas area firms, where she's responsible for all HR activities. She's got a strong emphasis in employee relations, policy, and culture development. She's got a bachelor's, a BA degree in senior professional in human resources, an SPHR, also from SHRM SCP, the Senior Certified Professional Accreditation. So brings tremendous credentials and experience. Emily joined after 8 years of working for Seattle law firms. where she supported matters in employment law and litigation. So an amazing background even prior to joining Assure. So she has 4 years of experience working for a staffing agency in healthcare field. Also enjoys the strategic element of HR and strives to proactively position clients for long-term growth. Emily also has a BA degree in communication sciences and disorders from Western Washington University. She also earned her human resource management certification from Lake Washington Technical College. She also is an SPHR, Senior Professional in Human Resources, and is a member of Lake Washington Human Resource Association. So, long setup. Just want you to know these aren't people who just coincidentally slept at a Holiday Inn Express last night and are talking HR. This is about as good as it gets to get real HR expertise. So, Shannon and Emily, welcome. Look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, so let's just most of the conversation today is going to be on how COVID has really kind of moved the bar, if you will, for the tipping point in which small businesses need to add HR. But let's kind of establish, some core pillars. Google the pillars of HR. You're going to come up with, somebody's going to say, here's 5, here's 6, here's 7, here's 4. I don't think there is a singular model, but I would say that it really does fall kind of in these big 5 buckets, right? Certainly, HR is always involved in compliance, and that's more the tactical legal side of HR, where we like to spend a lot of time as a company is helping companies grow. It's the other areas, right? It's culture, it's talent, it's performance, it's retention. So Shannon and Emily, I don't really care who goes first, but maybe talk to us about how what do you think the tipping point for small businesses when they needed to add HR pre-COVID in these 5 areas?
Go ahead, Shannon.
Okay. I'll start with compliance. I think if you have 2 employees, you have to be compliant with labor laws, right? Your policies and your procedures need to comply with local, state, and federal laws. So, and there's a lot of laws out there, right? And always new ones coming around the corner. And it's really difficult for small to medium-sized businesses to get a good grip on all the compliance issues. And so, as I said, if you have 2 employees, you have to still comply with all of these labor laws. And, with that being said, if you have 2 employees, you're going to have employee relations issues. So it's just, there used to be a standard of 50, like Mike mentioned, or 100 employees where HR needed to support your organization. But that really isn't true anymore because HR is more than it was, say, 20 years ago. It's just not about pushing paper from side to side. It's really being involved in the organization. So
I like the way you said that, Shannon. If you have 2 people, so if you have 1 person, you got to be compliant with laws for, creating a safe work environment and whatnot. But if as soon as you have 2 employees, you've got employee relations, and as soon as you have 3 employees, you've got conspiracies, right? So
right.
There really is no time too early to think about it. Emily, anything you would add on compliance?
With compliance, especially as companies grow and expand their operations in multi-state, that also triggers where the need for HR is much more apparent. And a lot of the times, small businesses aren't aware that these specific local or expanded cities and states have very differing laws that they need to comply to simply because they operate in those states. So just another added component.
Yeah, you know what, and jumping ahead a little bit, so that really plays in a post-COVID world where more and more employees might be virtual, and you might not know the laws in the next county over because now your employee is doing work from home versus at your side of business, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. How about culture? Where was HR's role in culture development prior to COVID?
Well, I'll speak up. I think HR has always been involved in developing culture. I think that's one of our main responsibilities, is to really drive policies and procedures to make sure that they're consistent with the organization's values and mission. HR has always been involved in drafting these policies and procedures, because they need to align with the organization, right? If the organization is an entrepreneurial or collegial or competitive organization, all the policies and procedures and how you operate and behave all needs to align in that same direction. So I think culture does play a really important part in an organization's success, and HR has always been at the table in these conversations.
Yeah, and you know what, Emily, maybe since we want to focus probably most of our time on the post-COVID, I know they're separate, talent, performance, and retention, but I kind of, in my brain, I think about them a little bit of being a continuum of the same thing, right? It's how do I recruit, find talent, then how do I develop and hold that talent accountable to perform aligned to my goals, and then retain that. Speak to a pre-COVID world, how small businesses need to be thinking about that, and kind of dispel this myth of the 50 employee line.
Emily.
Sorry, I
Shannon,
lost
if you want to
connection.
jump on, go ahead.
Yeah, my connection was a little iffy there. So with culture, talent, performance management, it is important to have more structure in place, especially as you get to that 50 employee mark. Employees have more confidence in the employer and the company that they work for if they have HR and they know that they have somebody that they can go to if they feel that they're being treated unfairly, or if they have input on better practices that they feel need to be in place. So I mean, the more employees you have, the more challenges you're going to have, and the more important HR is. Especially having an outsourced HR provider too, because we are seen as more of a neutral party. Employees tend to be a little more comfortable coming to an outsourced HR oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes they are.
Got it. Okay, Shannon, anything you would add for kind of that tipping point, how small businesses, because I think we need to acknowledge, right? So if I've got 49 employees and I'm hiring my 50th, there are new laws that I have to comply with, and I'm probably the size company I can start to afford, actual dedicated staff. But if I've got 5 employees, I mean, I can't. Hiring an HR manager isn't even an option, right? So how is it that smaller businesses just simply need to think about all of these different disciplines pre-COVID, and then we'll start jumping into the kind of the COVID specific items?
Well, I think in regards to talent management, for example, this is not a pillar that is totally owned by the HR department. So whether you have an HR department or you don't, managers have to be familiar with what you can say in an interview, what you can't say in an interview. So there needs to be some kind of training, because I know managers misstep from time to time, not intentionally, but it happens. And so HR can be a part of that discussion, or whether you have a payroll benefits person that you currently have in your organization, can they be kind of the point for attracting new talent?
All right, very good. Let's do this. So the main reason why everybody showed up today is to talk about how COVID has accelerated these things, because there really is some very actionable things for us here. So, and I say COVID changed. I think some of this stuff is not going to be temporary changes. I think to a large degree, a lot of these changes, the move to a more virtual, flexible, dynamic, on-demand workforce these mega trends were already well underway, but obviously, shelter orders, social distancing, economic challenges, these have just been kind of throwing fuel on the fire, if you will, that I think a lot of this is probably going to become new normal. So let's talk about question number one around compliance. So specifically COVID, how has COVID changed compliance for small business specific, but really any size business?
Well, one of the first things is a new law that was put in place that President Trump signed in March, called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. Many of you may be aware of that, hopefully so, because it's been in place since April. We could really spend probably the whole time of this webinar just discussing this one law. But
I'll digress, Shannon. If you guys want to learn about FFCRA, we have a couple of different webinars on just that topic. Just hop on our website and they are right there.
Good. Basically, there's two components. There's emergency family medical leave and emergency paid sick leave. And these apply to any employer that has less than 500 employees. A very high level overview is that emergency family medical leave is leave that is available for employees if they need time off because they need to care for their child and their child's school is closed. And one recent update that was just released by the Department of Labor yesterday is that when a child's school has closed, right now we're dealing with different scenarios, right? There's classroom instruction or there's part remote learning. So some of the questions that we're getting from employers or the companies that we support is, okay, how do I handle this if I have an employee whose child is going to be part in the classroom and part at home learning? Well, the DOL came out recently and said that if the employee's child has a choice on whether they stay at home or remote learning, they are not eligible for emergency family medical leave. But if the school has opened, and as part of the opening, they have a rotating schedule, for instance. But that time that they're on site, when the child is on site, the employee would not be eligible for emergency paid family medical leave, only for that time when they're at home, then they would be eligible. So that's really important to know because these laws are constantly changing, right? And another important piece of the FFCRA is that it's really important for employers to get documentation to support this time off because you can get tax credits for any time off that is paid under these programs. And so I would really recommend that you view those other webinars that Mike mentioned, or also the Department of Labor has an FAQ that is really, really helpful. And hopefully that will help you stay abreast of all the constant changes.
Yeah, you know what, I think we need to do another webinar just on that topic, Shannon, about this whole getting clarity around back to school. I mean, I know that I'm dealing with it. Pretty much everybody's dealing with it, right? Where it took a while to unpack the FFCRA and understand it in the first place, but it wasn't contemplated what part-time back to school, full-time back to school, virtual learning. This is so nuanced, and this affects all companies. There is no size limit. If you got one employee and that employee has kids in school, you're dealing with this, right? So, but beyond FFCRA, so it's a deep ocean. We encourage everybody to hop on the website and watch those webinars. What else? Because one of the things I think about, I think HR compliance, I've always kind of pointed to this, misconception of the 50 employee line, like I don't need HR until I have 50 employees. But there's like kind of ancient laws like FLSA, right, that have some basic safety requirements as an employer, regardless of your size. Emily, you want to tell everybody, remind everybody maybe what FLSA even is and how that kind of ties back to COVID?
Yeah, so FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act, they specifically when it comes to COVID, we have the exempt and non-exempt type classification requirements. And we're noticing that businesses right now, they have positions that were once exempt, but they're having to apply a lot of non-exempt type duties for those individuals. And well, temporarily, there might be an exception during the pandemic as pertain to risk avoidance with classifying or keeping those employees as exempt. You really need to keep a close eye on it as we move through these months, because if you do have an employee that's exempt and they're taking on a lot of non-exempt hourly type duties, they could be at risk for being misclassified and be owed overtime. So it's just something to be very watchful of as during these times. A lot of the positions are changing into more of a hybrid role. They're taking on, a job title may have very different tasks at this time because business needs have shifted and they're absorbing other roles.
So if I'm a small business owner, I'm just trying to survive, right? And I got 15 employees. I remember the FLSA is an acronym from college, but my employees have to wear many hats, and I'm just asking them to do stuff. Can you give a really specific example of what that might look like? Because I think people can get in trouble here without ever trying to do the right thing here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you have, for example, a manager that is usually overseeing other employees, managing their performance, heavily involved with discretionary type decisions, and then they are now having to do a lot of routine type tasks without discretion, without overseeing employees, because many companies have had to do tremendous layoffs where they just don't have the workforce to manage like they once had prior to COVID. And so that would be a good example where a manager is just suddenly thrown into more routine type duties that an hourly worker would typically do.
Yeah, very good. What else? How about ADA? Are there any American Disabilities Act consequences from COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. ADA is actually something that we're having to manage a lot closer now because a lot of employees can't return back on site. Either they've been working from home, or maybe they are on standby and being asked to return back on site, and they can't because they may have a medical condition that puts them at a higher risk of contracting COVID. So in these cases, we really need to enter what we call the ADA interactive process, where we have a conversation with the employee, trying to understand a little bit more about why they can't come back to work. I strongly do not recommend terminating an employee who can't return back to work due to a health issue without going through the ADA accommodation process. The CDC, Center for Disease Control, has identified some medical conditions that qualify as being high risk, and they classified them into two categories. There's medical conditions that are at an increased risk of contracting the COVID virus, or might be at an increased risk. In Washington, for instance, an employer can't ask for medical documentation if an employee's medical condition falls in that first category that I mentioned, or at an increased risk. But if the employee's health condition falls in the second category, you can ask for medical documentation. And so, but I recommend that you refer to your state on when you can and can't ask for further medical documentation, because that will vary based on state law.
How about just general safety? So I talk to small business owners every week, and I think, nobody's trying to create an unsafe environment, but there are, beyond just trying to do the right thing, there are some legal requirements and minimum bar that employers have to have, right? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. So with the safety practices, as you mentioned, there are some states, some counties specifically, that have their own template and their own requirements on what information they want employers to outline. So there's a clear practice in place in order to reduce the risk of COVID in the workplace. We actually develop our own COVID safety policies for our clients, where it addresses CDC recommendations, OSHA recommendations / requirements, LNI, and of course the government's orders, the governor's orders. So these type of practices are extremely important, especially if you have LNI show up on site, and they will ask you, do you have a safety policy and what does it look like? And more importantly, are your employees aware that you have a safety policy? Do they know that there's expectations while they're on site to have the social distancing? Do they know that they're required to wear the mask? Do they know that they should be washing their hands? Have they been told what the proper procedures for washing their hands are according to OSHA? So all of these type of information that needs to be communicated to employees, and we strongly recommend that employees sign off on these policies too, because it does make them, it's easier for management to hold employees accountable. In addition, it also provides reassurance to employees that the employer is taking this serious and they do want to be in compliance, and that they do have the employees' best interest in mind to keep them all safe.
Yeah, you know what? One of the things when I think about, I think a challenge growing a business is business owners. They on one hand they want a warm culture, right? And I know we're going to talk culture next. A warm, trusting, not legalistic in nature, but this genuine, authentic relationships, right? And so, I get pushback from folks all the time about, I don't want to have a paper form for that. I don't want a signature for that. I don't want to be all legalistic. I want to just have a relationship with my employees. Speak to that, how you really can do both. It's really more about how you position it in how documentation can be really a form of validation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all in the communication, how you deliver it, making sure that you're telling employees you're trying to create a safe environment for everyone. And even if colleagues don't fall into that high risk category, they could have loved ones. And so reducing their risk while they're at the workplace is extremely important, even for those that expand outside, your colleagues. And holding them accountable is important. Many times we've seen, especially lately, employees are uncomfortable voicing when they think that safety isn't held to the standards that's needed, and they do want to reach out to HR. If they don't have HR available, we're hearing that they often submit anonymous complaints to LNI because their main concern is to make sure that they're in a safe environment. And then you have LNI showing up on site, and again, they'll ask you, where's your safety policy? How are you communicating? How are you enforcing these safety practices in your workplace?
Yeah. Hey, we could spend more than an hour just on this topic of compliance alone, but I do want to kind of move on to some of the others. Last thing I want to hit on compliance. How has COVID changed laying people off, whether it's furloughs or terminations. I mean, this is just a harsh reality that a huge percentage of employers have had to face.
Yeah, with layoffs, there always should be a systematic approach when you're deciding who to let go, whether that be based on seniority or performance type. And of course, if it's based on performance, there needs to be that backup documentation, coaching counsels that you can prove that you've communicated to the employee. Without that, if you're laying off employees because you just don't want to accommodate them or you don't want to deal with their special needs or whatnot, it can open you up for the perception of discrimination. And so having a systematic approach for deciding the layoffs and having it based on seniority, performance, or whatnot is very important to reduce your risk, your liability.
Yeah, very good. Shannon, anything else you'd want to say on how COVID has impacted compliance for small businesses before we move on to culture?
Yeah, I think also just to add on to what Emily said is, there are some people who get laid off and other people are still left behind, and there's issues with that too, right? From my friend got laid off and I'm still here. Why am I here? And so what we recommend with any kind of change like that, when you're making these difficult decisions, that you've really thought through how you're going to message the layoff. And another recommendation, and this is true, prior to COVID, is being clear with employees. If you can at all possible, lay off employees all at one time, right? When you tend to drag it out, like you're going to lay off this department this week and another department the next week, people feel like there's never an end in sight. And this causes, stress issues, of course, with those who are remaining, wanting to know when the next shoe is going to drop. So I would just try to be as systematic as you can in making those difficult decisions.
So last thing I'm going to say on Q1 before we move on is the intent of this conversation is not to scare the heck out of business owners, but there's a lot you have to do to stay compliant. And unfortunately, ignorance of the law is no excuse, because all it takes is your employee to file a complaint, whether it's with the health department or EOC or whatever the case may be. And so not knowing what you don't know is a dangerous thing. So we can have some recommendations at the end. Let's go on to culture. So clearly how we work together has changed, right? And an awful lot of culture had to do with face-to-face interactions and maybe office parties, happy hours, whatever the case may be, right? Talk to us. How is it? And maybe it's just obvious to say how it's impacting us, but maybe let's just jump to what can we do? What are the things we can do to drive culture in a COVID world?
Yeah, it's very interesting because now working from home for most organizations was an exception, and now it's very much the norm. Everyone is working from home that can. And it's varying responses. Some employees love it. That's how they work their best. And then others feel extremely isolated, disconnected. Maybe they're not savvy with technology. And so they even have more struggles with using portals where there's video capabilities. So the regular just interactions, communicating expectations, having a schedule, having those happy hours and those other fun events that you used to have in the office, trying to make them available remotely and using the video capabilities, and of course being patient to those that need a little extra hand holding.
It's interesting, Emily, you talk about the bunch of us, people like you or I, maybe we've lived on conference calls for much of our career. but what a difference it makes. And you got to give people some warning so they don't show up in their PJs, no makeup or hair done. But when people know that, the Monday morning staff meeting is going to be on video, it's just an amazing different level of connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shannon, what other guidance would you give in this more remote world? What people can do to drive culture?
Well, I think we first need to recognize that attitudes have changed with our working environment world, right? And it really has impacted most of us, right? And it happened all at once and fast. And so for those who thought maybe they could never work from home, are suddenly changing their minds and thinking, wow, this might be okay. But I think, until a vaccine is available, the office experience and how we interact with each other won't really go back to what it once was. So we really need to try to find ways how we can communicate and stay connected to our teams, how we can collaborate, how flexible can we be, right? The hearing dogs barking or kids yelling in the background of a Zoom call is just kind of accepted now, when before maybe you would, freak out if something like that happened, but now it's just part of doing business and having calls working from home. So I think we just need to recognize that it is different, and what can we do to improve the environment to keep everyone together and collaborating.
You know what? I'm curious for your guys' thoughts. So, culture is something I'm passionate about, but there is going to be a new normal, and I think maybe it's a topic of another day, how to drive culture in a virtual post-COVID world. But we're not post-COVID yet. So, just in the moment, mental health is an issue, right? What can we do to help our employees in their mental health? How do we even identify if there are issues? Because I think this is a growing, very silent but big issue that's building out there.
Yeah, I'll speak on that. There is really, everyone is anxious now, right? During this pandemic, and this affects how we work with each other. So we really need to make sure, if you do, as an organization, have an employee assistance program, that you make sure people know that it's available. That's one easy step. A lot of times we have employee assistance programs as part of our benefit package, but no one uses it. No one knows about it. So really make sure that you're communicating that they have access to trained mental health professionals. But then I think as a manager, acknowledging that anxiety exists and talking about it as an organization, it's, I think, really important that managers watch out for those signs. For instance, is your top performer not engaged or absent from discussions? If you see a really big change in performance, if this is happening, acknowledge it and try to understand it. I think if leaders are honest about their own mental health challenges, we all have it, right? Whether we're a manager or not. I think this might open up discussions with employees. And maybe this is a topic of conversation where you could bring in a professional to participate in a Zoom meeting during a staff meeting. But I think really listening to your employees, really beyond the how are you doing, but really listen and encourage people to speak up and acknowledge that it is a stressful time for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Emily, anything you would add?
Just emphasizing the understanding component, trying to be understanding and realize that employees have very different home environments that can impact their job. Some live alone, and that can be an issue, but others have their spouse working from home, they have kids. It's just the home environment is varied, what type of challenges each of them have. So
Yeah, I don't want to sound trite, but it's the old we're all in the same storm, but not in the same boat, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing how different, how stressful and challenging and difficult this can be, but in very, very different ways for different people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's wrap up on this topic. What is it that proactively that employers can do? This isn't if I'm a home remodeling run a home remodeling firm. I've got 3 crews, 35 employees. I don't have resources to bring in a professional on a Zoom call, right? What is it? What is it that the average small business person can really do? Just some practical things to help with communication in helping to keep a positive culture.
Mhm. Yeah, I think Shannon, just emphasizing Shannon's point of having the managers do those extra check-ins. And if you need to set calendar reminders to do that, being very watchful of if any employee has changed their performance, if their performance has altered in a negative way, making sure that you're reaching out to that individual and getting a better understanding of what's going on in their life, particularly. So.
And I can add a little bit to that too, is I read a really great article, the Harvard Business Review article on ways that managers can support employees' health. And I actually sent that to one of my clients that I work with. And that simple article just started a conversation. And now it's just gone through the organization and really given people ideas, managers, employees, on ways that they can help each other through this stressful time. So you can find articles on the internet that may help. I know not everyone can bring in a trained professional, but there's good resources out there.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, it sounds so simple, but you can never over communicate in really any circumstance. But I think just extra communication more than ever is just so critical right now for driving culture. Okay,
right.
Let's move on to our next one. So the search for talent. This whole the phrase "war for talent" is really kind of a remnant of the early 2000s, almost late 1990s. But it's really more of a big enterprise company kind of a play. It's kind of a macro concept, right? But prior to COVID, unemployment at record lows, decades lows. Finding good people. I mean, I know just in my local town, just frontline service workers, it was almost impossible to find anybody. So this war for talent and finding employees really came to be a giant issue for everybody pre-COVID. And now the dynamic is just it's kind of weird, right? Because on one hand, I may not be searching for talent because I'm just trying to survive. I just had to lay off half my workforce, but yet there's all this incredible talent in the marketplace now. So how should growing businesses or surviving businesses that one day want to grow, how should they be thinking about talent management in a COVID world?
Well, it's certainly different, right? And due to the unemployment rate, there's more people out there. But there's another issue with that, is not everyone wants to work on site anymore. And so, people are fine working from home, but when they get called back from standby or a new opportunity, people are a little hesitant about being out there, working at a restaurant or assisted living facility, whatever the particular industry is. But if you're lucky enough as an organization to be hiring right now, then you really have to rethink kind of the way that you've done it before. May not work now, right? Everyone's hiring from a phone or video interviewing almost entirely. I don't know if anyone has interviewed with a face mask on, or seeing someone in person and not being able to shake their hand. So there's things that have changed, But also, I think hiring managers need to look at new skill sets, right? Because these are kind of unpredictable. We're living in an unpredictable business environment right now. So you might want to screen for technology, communication, adaptability, ability to change in this crazy environment. Can you work independently? Maybe some of those soft skills have been overlooked before, but I think those are even more important now. And then also making sure that you have a really solid training program. It's really hard to onboard a new hire when they're working from home and you don't have that daily interaction with them. So it's just coming up with new strategies to adjust to our new environment.
Shannon, that's so smart. It's really sticking with me. What you just said about, it's really, you got to think about changing the criteria for even hiring people in the first place, right? Because
right.
Maybe the job title hasn't changed. Maybe you're hiring an accounts payable analyst, right? Maybe that's the job, but there are incremental new different skills required to do this job from home versus face to face. We're not going to stand over your desk, or we can hop in a conference room together. That's a really good point.
Right. As I said, some people need more guidance and more hand-holding. Do you really have the time and to do that? So I think you really need to think about who you're hiring, and if they have the skills that you need to work from home, if that's your current environment.
Yeah. Emily, any thoughts for people for how do you even find the talent? How that may have changed?
For finding talent, that is probably pretty similar, but I think that it's important that when employers are looking to bring employees back, they look at their workforce on standby and that have been furloughed, and again bringing them back in a very systematic approach, whether it be seniority, performance, and hopefully you have that documentation if you're basing on performance to bring somebody back as opposed to another person in that same role. And communicating the safety policy, reviewing expectations, how the workplace has differed, and what sort of skills you really need them to emphasize when you do bring them back. Companies need more flexibility now more than ever. They need employees to adapt and to take on additional responsibilities as business needs define it. So it's all about communication and understanding that we're in for more changes. Companies are adapting and they're going to be in this type of situation for many months, and employees need to adjust and be willing to adjust.
Emily, Shannon, I don't care which one of you takes this, but I want to broach what I think is a really difficult subject for talent. And there's this reality, and I've gotten questions from business owners in the last, I'd say 2 months, especially in this topic, where they might have employees that are good, really good humans. They're there for a reason. They like them. They perform at least satisfactorily, maybe not doing a bad job, maybe not doing a great job, but all of a sudden, because so many layoffs and so much disruption in the marketplace, there's some incredible talent available that just simply wasn't before, where maybe you had to really proactively recruit from people within your industry, develop relations over a long period of time, and wait for the trigger event when someone coincidentally is available. All of a sudden now there's like people with crazy talent and job experience that are just on the job boards, which would never really happened before. Mm-hmm. How can you advise business owners, and there's two sides of this coin. There's how do you manage and be human and fair and consistent with your existing employees at the same time when you have real opportunities to upgrade the talent of your organization?
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think you need to be really careful about that, right? For a variety of reasons. We always think that an employee should be counseled, right? If they're just an average performer or not meeting expectations. So, always documentation is important. But then what does that say to the rest of your team if you're letting go this 20-25 year tenured employee and bringing in this new talent? There's a message there that may not be positive to your work culture. So I'd caution you a little bit on doing that without some strong documentation to show that this employee is not performing up to expectations.
Yeah. You know what it kind of reminds me of, Shannon, is so many times, as a manager, I just think about my own career. So many times the light bulb comes on. I wish I would have been better at the HR function before I wanted to do this thing, right? And it's almost like it smacks of, man, if I'd have done a better job documenting conversations, if I'd have done a better job setting expectations, if I'd have done a better job lovingly explaining my expectations, that we wouldn't be in this difficult situation today, right? And I think it speaks to, having good employees whom you like to work with and are a good cultural fit, but you think could and should be doing more. The right thing to do is to still, as a part of being a leader, is having frank conversations and documenting those conversations and setting expectations that you still strive for more. What can you comment on that?
Right. I think employees deserve feedback, right? They can't improve unless you're getting them constructive feedback, praise, whatever is appropriate, because that will change their behavior. And I think you'll get a stronger employee. Sometimes employees just don't know where they stand. And that managers have to own that. So, always having that communication going back and forth is important in giving them feedback.
Yeah, and just because you think that they're an average employee, but just a good person, and that's why you're keeping them, they aren't drawing that same conclusion. If you don't give them feedback, they must assume they're doing a great job, right? So
right, and you never
Exactly.
want to walk into a situation and end up terminating an employee that has never received any feedback. Right, and that's unfair to the employee, and then we're not doing our jobs as managers, setting the groundwork and holding employees accountable for meeting performance expectations. So
yeah,
that's on us.
I think the punchline here is really good leadership HR practices day in and day out with everybody always sets you up to take advantage of opportunities in the marketplace, like a talent upgrade. If you don't do the right things, you might be in a position you're going to miss out, because taking out an employee could be just disastrous culturally, right?
Right.
Back to the previous topic. Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, tough topic, but I think it was important we address it. Let's move on to topic number 4. So performance management. And I think we can just pick up from where we left off in the previous question. How specifically is COVID changing performance management? Emily, you want to maybe kick us off here?
Yeah. So again, it kind of draws from our prior conversation where you have these employees working remote. There's less face-to-face contact in most companies, and that regular feedback needs to be even more emphasized. And for managers that weren't as skilled in that prior, it's really important now to acknowledge that and make notes where you need to on where people are excelling, where they're doing a great job, recognize their efforts, but also have those tough conversations where they do need to step up a little bit more, or where expectations are falling short. You need to have that regular feedback. And as Shannon mentioned, you're not doing your employees any favors by sparing them from those difficult conversations. You're think of it as you're setting them up for success, and also you're setting the company up for more success. If you can turn around an employee, motivate them, give them the tools they need to do their job better, it's better for the employee and it's better for the company.
Yeah. What about the COVID world where things are maybe more remote? I mean, I think about this image that's on the screen. What maybe used to happen in a conference room can't happen in a conference room. So there's alternatives to whether it's to walk around the building or a Zoom call, voice versus video. What are some practical things bosses can do to better manage performance in a COVID world?
Yeah, so many companies may be going through their normal review period now, right? And which makes it difficult when you can't have the person sitting across the desk from you. But you need to find maybe benefits, possibly with delaying your process, maybe waiting till the next quarter, or especially streamlining your process. But I wouldn't cancel the whole feedback session entirely. It's still important to make sure that you're capturing all those performance weaknesses and strengths along the way. But you could maybe make it a less formal process just because there's more stress in the workplace now. One company that I support streamline their actual review form from a 5-page, very lengthy written process down to 1 page, right? Strengths or accomplishments and areas of improvement, and they're done, right? So people don't have as much time now because typically managers may be doing a variety of tasks and they may not have time to complete a 5-page performance review on each of their employees. So I think it's perfectly fine to condense your process. But I do recommend that you have it at some point. Delaying it a quarter is fine. I probably wouldn't delay it much later than that. It's really important that we capture all that information and take into consideration in regards to goal attainment or performance standards. Are you taking into consideration that people are working from home? Maybe they were on standby and returning back. Were they even with you for the whole entire performance review period, that entire 12 months? So you should take all those things into consideration as you're going through this very important process of giving feedback to your employees.
Emily, can you kind of expand on that? And what is going through my head is like frequency, right? So like there's the traditional annual performance review, maybe a formal process at many companies tied to compensation. But I mean, when I think about like delaying a review by a quarter because of COVID, that makes sense in this annualized context. But I'm always thinking like, man, if I had to review all my employees over the last 12 months, it'd be like 2 reviews each, right? Here's how we did pre-COVID. Here's what post-COVID looked like, because the jobs are almost like so different, right? It seems to me that there's been a trend that COVID is probably accelerating the need of more frequent, more regular feedback. It doesn't have to be formal or informal necessarily even. I agree everybody should have a process, but speak to the frequency in which the performance should be quote unquote managed, maybe just talked about.
Yeah, during COVID and with remote workers, managers should be checking in with their employees more regularly and talking about challenges that they are having that could impact their responsibilities, their expectations that the manager has on them. So I think also that it can vary per position and with the employee. As mentioned before, our home environments vary drastically. Somebody working from home may have an easier time, and then others, they may have a house full of a very different situation that can impact their job. So I think that managers they need to have more frequent interaction in general, check in with their employees, see how they're doing, see how their responsibilities are going, and if they need any additional help or support.
All right. Any last advice you'd give to business owners for how to manage performance in this COVID environment?
Yeah, I think be flexible, be understanding, but don't do away with your entire process, right? Even though we're working in very unusual times, we still have businesses to run, and we still need to hold employees accountable and give them feedback. So I think you can do it in a compassionate and understanding way, but I wouldn't just throw away your current process.
Yeah, I agree completely. All right, let's move on to our last question, retention. And I think really all these topics we've talked about, right? Compliance is, I'm gonna compartmentalize that separate, but culture, talent, performance, these all kind of result in, at least as related to retention. But again, let's focus on how COVID has impacted employee development and retention.
Yeah, so now, I mean, you have employees that may be targeted by other employers too, if you have really strong, talented employees. So I do think it's important to highlight the development opportunities that they have within your organization, making sure that they're getting that development. Cross-training, of course, is very important for companies now, because they may have to do more layoffs later. We don't know what the upcoming months may bring. And if you have to lay off more people, the ones remaining need to pick up where others have left. And so I would very much, I recommend emphasizing that cross-training where it makes sense. Also, for retention purposes, we see employees not wanting to come back or leaving if an employer does not have a safety policy and is not enforcing recommendations by the CDC, OSHA, LNI. So for retention purposes, it is very important that employers have a safety policy in place and that they're communicating to employees expectations in order to reduce COVID in the workplace. So that also plays in for retention.
You know, I think about development. You know, there's the obvious development of your employees to, you know, people want to be someplace. We publish, you know, maybe it's 100 blog posts in the last 3 years on this topic. You know, but people want to be in a place where they are growing and getting feedback and developing, have the tools, and resources to do so, right? But there's this really practical side of development in a COVID world where you need cross-trained employees to simply do the job if someone has to go out, whether it's because they're sick, maybe they have the coronavirus, or some FSCRA related leave due to it. Just there's a real practical component here. Shannon, you want to speak to that?
Of course, there's always need to cross-train, whether we're in a COVID environment or not. One thing I would like to add is that when we do make changes to an employee's job, maybe because an employee got laid off and they're no longer available for performing that job, that when we assign those temporary tasks or responsibilities to our employees, make sure that we're really clear with them that this is a temporary assignment, right? And that it may be necessary at some point to reassign that task back to the employee who was on standby. So we've definitely noticed that during this time, there's a lot of holes in organizations, right? The procedures manual that you put off doing because you didn't have time is really useful now when you're trying to figure out how to do a task when that person is no longer employed. So there's a lot of things that we can do during this period of time. Maybe organizations are a little slower now than than they were before. This is the time to make sure you have all your policies and procedures in place.
Yeah, you know what? The more we talk about all these topics, what just shines a light for me is that when I think about small businesses, when do you start having to need to add HR, at least the skills or best practices thereof? There is no such thing as too small, right? I mean, these are all just the best ways to run your company, because you're going to have to run your company with employees. And as long as you have employees, you need to be doing these things, right?
Right. I mean, and I'll speak as I have a client who has 15 employees, and I have a client that has 1,200 employees. So every company, I think, needs HR support in some capacity, and they sometimes don't realize they need it until they need it, right? So I think it's a really helpful part of the whole organization.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you guys. This has been a really great conversation. And my hope is that anybody listening to this discussion gets value without ever having to do business with us, right? I mean, obviously, we would love to have more formal relationships in support our small businesses as customers. But hopefully anybody listening to this conversation, that some light bulbs are coming on that, hey, compliance isn't just for big companies. I need to start thinking about culture from day one. I need to have a talent management strategy, right? And I need to do the things that a good HR practices to manage the performance of my people and grow and develop them so that they want to stay with me. So this has been a great conversation. Shannon and Emily, I just want to thank you very much. I do want to invite everybody to hop on our website. We have a COVID site with just tons of resources. So it's filled with webinars like this. You can sign up for new ones. We publish them almost every week. There are dozens of recorded webinars. So if you just need some step-by-step instructions, how to fill out the easy forgiveness form for your PPP loan, or you want some best practices, or we have links to literally every state in most of the major municipalities for the county websites and the COVID websites, so you can understand the local health coordinators' guidance and rules. So trying to be a resource for you. Lots of payroll and HR best practices to boot. This is what we do: is we help small businesses. We have over 60,000 small businesses that we provide payroll and HR software and services to. Shannon and Emily on the bottom right there from our HR services team. If you are a small business and you can't afford full headcount, it's not a problem. We have tiered services that start from simple online tools where you can hop online, ask any question you want, and get pretty much any answer on any topic you could think of from HR, so that you don't have to hire a professional on staff when you've only got 2 employees, but you still need critical answers in HR, to tier 2 services that include call center. You don't want to have to search for your own answer in a database in an online tool. Talk to a real live human who's a certified HR professional, all the way up to our tier 3 services, where we really can be your virtual HR department. So you have really talented people similar to Shannon, similar to Emily, that are on the phone with you, holding meetings, in really being that HR support at a fraction of what you could ever hire direct staff to do that for you. So enough about us. We want to wish everybody the very, very best. Hopefully everybody has a great safe Labor Day weekend. You enjoy yourself, and we all get through this together so that we can start growing when we all come out of this pandemic. Thank you so much.